Hello out there and welcome to another painting video. Today I will be watercolor painting a portrait of Dana Scully from The X-Files. She is just the coolest person ever and I just had to make a portrait of her. So to start with, I scanned my little sketch from my sketchbook and played with it a little bit in Photoshop, mainly to get the layout, to get the lettering that I wanted at the bottom, so that I could then transfer it to watercolor paper later. Now I'm just sketching in the lettering that I want. It says science, as you can read, and I made the dot over the I a little planet with rings, just for a cute little detail. Then I just had to readjust the positioning of the letters because I didn't like the way they sat on her shape, and I just wanted it to look a little bit more organized. I just wanted it to be very, very clear and readable. So now I'm going to start mapping out the colors that I want. And Dana always wears neutral colors, maybe a light blue or light purple sometimes, but mostly like browns and beiges and very 90s power suit woman colors. So her suit jacket's going to be like a dark brown, and then I wanted the space to be like bam, hey, galaxy, boom, ugh, rainbow. So I'm doing them kind of muted here, but the colors will be a lot brighter once I start painting. So I'm just mapping out more or less where I want the galaxy to be, to fade into black, and then this painting will probably end up being a square once I'm done. So there we go, I printed her out in black and white. And then I had to go in and ink some of her features again because they're pretty lightly sketched, and since my watercolor paper is pretty thick, I wouldn't be able to see that through to transfer it. So here I am speeding through the inks, just the important details. Now I am ready with my light table and my watercolor paper and my grayscale pigment liners. I didn't want to use black for the line drawing here because I wanted a little bit of a softer look. So I'm just using one of the lighter grays, the sort of cool toned gray, and filling in all the little details that I need so I can paint. I had a lot of fun drawing Scully's hair. She's got a really cool hairstyle that's actually kind of vintage and sort of 40s 50s style, really. Which is kind of fun in a very, 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 very 90s show. Yeah, got the lettering done. The lettering was going to be a real pain in the butt later, but for now we're just going to get some masking fluid, and I'm going to cover everything because I want to start with the background. I had no real reason for this except that I didn't really want to do masking fluid over top the watercolors later. So here we go, just filling everything in with this stinky stuff. It really smells awful and it ruins your brushes. Do not use nice brushes with masking fluid. You will regret. This brush is irreparable. After this, it looks like a dead porcupine. So yeah, let that dry. I got out my Ecoline liquid watercolors. I got these because they are really bright and really fun to work with because I wanted to work wet on wet. And this way I would have the brightness and the saturation without having to use a ton of water, and which obviously waters down the color. So here we go, dripping in some magenta, some blue with a bit of green, a purple, and a green which I ended up not using. So here we go. Lots of water with a big brush, and just slap on some color, some pink. I dried it a little bit with a fan first, but slap on some pink, nice and bright. And I used the basic color scheme from my Photoshop sketch, which had a lot more turquoise in it. This one ended up being a lot more blue, which is why I brought out the green that I didn't end up using, but that's fine. This is the part of the process, just trust the process. So basically I just went on with this for a while. This took a long time. I think this part took far longer than all the detailed bits and the sketch and everything else combined. Because there's quite a bit of drying time, even if I'm using the fan. And I just wasn't... It took a while for me to be happy with this. I went back and forth and adding more color, more water, blending some more, adding more pink, and then as it dried lighter than I expected. So I went in with more color again and again and again. But after a couple hours and after a break for pizza, it turned out fine. So here we go, drying again. More pink, more purple, more blue. I love the way it blends. It just goes like an octopus. It looks cool. It looks really, really dark in the video, but it's a lot brighter in real life. And also, it's because it's wet, it looks a lot more saturated, but it'll dry a bit lighter. There you go, it's starting to look spacey. Now it's dry, and then I just threw on some black to get that really deep dark space black, the void look. I'm blending it out a little bit. This took forever. There we go, everything's all black. Now it actually looks like a galaxy, but without the stars. I was considering writing the word Starbuck underneath there instead of science, since that's what Scully's father calls her. And the relationship with her father is really important in the earlier seasons. But I was like, yeah, but I don't want... This is a really cool, strong, smart female character. I don't want her relationship with a man to be her defining feature. But her belief in science, that's her big thing. She's the rational one. So that's why I settled for the word science. Also, it's pretty interesting because, you know, I drew her cross necklace on there, and that's important for her as well. That comes up in later seasons as well, how important that is to her. And I think it's interesting, the contrast between her faith in, you know, in the supernatural, basically, you know, the church, and her reluctance to accept Mulder's faith in aliens. I think that's an interesting, and she gets that faith shaken, and Mulder gets his faith shaken in the opposite direction. It's an interesting dynamic that they have. Anyway, rolling off the masking fluid now that it's dry. This is always so satisfying, especially when there's a lot of it, which there is in this case. I didn't cover everything, as you can see. There's a bit of a black smudge on her shirt, or on her on her body, but that's fine. I'll cover that with a dark color anyway. So getting rid of that, and then I'll go in with washes of the color for her face and her hair to begin with. Really light colors. As with all watercolors, you start with the light colors and build your way up to the darker ones, because you can't paint over. You can't, they're not opaque, so you can't paint over something that you've done. And then her skin tone. And then I went back in with the same shade again, a little bit darker, just to give some highlights and, you know, make it the actual color it's supposed to be and not just that light wash. So I did the same thing with her skin, just adding the same shade again, layering it a little bit to start giving shadows on her face. I'll go in later with a darker blue toned shade later, but this is just to start them off. And and as I was drying this, I thought it was fuzz on the picture. It wasn't. What? So I don't know what that was, what I touched, but whatever it was, there was paint on it. So I was quick, got some water on a clean brush, and just dealt with it, basically. Anyway, back to the painting. So after letting this layer dry, I got out my little tiny baby Cotman brush, which is my favorite for details, and went in with the hair color again to sort of define strands and, you know, give it more depth and dimension. With that tiny little brush, basically just like painting tiny little strands of hair in several layers and just giving her more life, I guess. This is probably the most fun part of the process, is doing these tiny little details, and you just sort of see your little simple sketch kind of coming to life and starting to look like a sort of real person. Then I went back and did pretty much the same process on her skin. I feel like all watercolor is just, you know, the same thing over and over again. Layer, 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 until you get the right results. So this is still the same sort of skin tone, and I'm defining her cheekbones here, which I found in the reference picture. That's a pretty important part of her face that really defines that this is Gillian Anderson. She's so pretty. She's such a beautiful woman. She really is. Anyway, distracted. Got an even darker shade of that reddy brown, like a rust color, and got some shades in her hair. On hindsight, I think this color may have been a little bit too dark, but I think it works. There's so much darkness around her in this space that I think it still sort of balances everything out, so that's fine. Still using my teeny tiny brush, drawing individual little sort of strands. This is sped up, by the way. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if anyone believes that I paint this fast. I'm pretty quick, but I'm not that quick. So this is sped up quite a bit. So I think the hair is pretty much done for now, and I can go in and get the actual shade color on her face. So I've used a Payne's Gray, which is a blue tone gray. I love using this for shading. I will talk about this in any video that I use it because it's such a good color. And you really get those sort of natural shadows, which are usually blue toned if you're out in the sun. And it just gives so much more life to the picture than using like a completely neutral gray or skin tones. So yeah, using it to define the little lines on her face and everything. And I'm using a little bit of wet on wet, so I'm, you know, painting an edge and then using water to blend it out to give it a smooth look. So finally moving on to her suit jacket. And I made this, like I said, I was going to make it brown. I chose a fairly warm tone brown so that it would work well with the background, because I mean this is the largest flat color that's going to be on this piece, and I didn't want it to contrast too much with the background, which is got a lot of red and pink in it. So a red tone brown, and I'm pretty sure she wears a jacket exactly this color at some point in the series. Her lips are also sort of brown toned pink, very sort of 90s lipstick, the kind of color that I like to wear as well, actually. I also did her blush here in a second, I think. There we go. Very light pink, rosy shade, very discreet. In general, Scully's makeup is pretty discreet. You can tell she wears like a dark brown eyeliner, but not much else. Sometimes maybe a hint of brown eyeshadow, but it's very, very neutral, very discreet, and very FBI appropriate, I guess. I don't know if there are any regulations for makeup. I don't think I could work in the FBI. A, I'm not smart enough, and B, I wear all kinds of makeup all the time. But I think this is where the face really starts to come together. Get the eyebrow color in, and it's just like all the little details that make her recognizable as Dana Scully, which is pretty cool. This is the part of portraits that is fun to do. Getting some definition on her lips, giving them some more shape. She has very, I'm gonna get distracted again. She has very pretty, luscious lips, really nicely, naturally shaped. Getting some shading on her collars. and, you know, like I said, layer on layer on layer. I added some of that blue shade to her hair as well to make the shading a little bit more natural and blend in with everything else. I was actually a little bit unsure of her eye color, because in the reference picture I had they looked more green, but in a lot of shots in the actual series they're like super blue, so I went for blue. And then I actually put a layer of yellow on her hair, and you can tell the difference here. It just makes it way more sort of golden and saturated and very, very pretty looking, so I'm glad I did that. I felt like her jacket was looking a little bit flat, so I added some drop shadows under her collars and just to define the edges there and give it some depth. Painted that on and blended it out, and it turned out looking just fine. I could have done maybe a pattern or something on there, just sort of give it some sort of hint of tweedness, but I kind of like that as well. I want her face to be the standout. Adding some shading to the irises, and I gave her freckles! In some close-up shots you can see that she has some freckles. I mean, she's a redhead after all. But it just looks cute, okay? I like freckles. So yeah, I got those done. Defining the eyes a little bit more. Making them look really deep and piercing. She has a really piercing stare. And then I went in with a pure black around all the edges, in part because I couldn't get the masking fluid, because my brush is ruined. I couldn't get the masking fluid very nicely on the little curls that stick out there. So I went around and defined them just to make them look like I'd done them properly to begin with. But I also feel like it makes her pop a little bit from the background too, so that was important. Went in with a brown shade to do the contours on her face, the eyelids and the chin and all that, just to make sure that you can see everything properly and she has a very defined features. Did the same thing with her collar, but with a gray. And then I went in with a tiny little bit of gray for a really important feature, actually, those little smile lines that she has. They're not as prominent as, say, her little mouche or her hairstyle, but they're still like, they're a pretty important part of the face. They're a detail that you can see in a lot of pictures and in a lot of shots. She has those tiny little, they're not like wrinkles, they're more like smile lines. So I thought it was important to get them in there. So after I was done shading the eyes, I could finally go in and do the pupils. And it's really starting to come together now. You can tell she's a human being with eyes that can see. And then I finally got to do her eyelashes as well. Once again, one of her very pretty features. She has very pretty eyelashes. And since she doesn't have a lot of other makeup, they're pretty prominent in a lot of pictures. So I wanted to make sure that they were well defined in this portrait as well. Now I got out my Japanese metallic watercolors because I wanted to make her necklace actually gold colored. So I just went in with my tiny brush and made her cross and chain gold. And then gave them a bit of shading as well with one of the gray shades, like a drop shadow. And also because in certain angles the gold is very bright and it sort of looks like the same color as the skin. So. And then another one of my favorite parts is getting the highlights done. So I got out my also Japanese comic white and went in and got the brightest highlights with this really, really opaque white ink, which is generally used on like manga and other black and white comics on like completely black ink to give highlights. So it's super opaque. So I used that and highlighted her eyes. And I like to do this thing like I'm doing here on this side of her face, where I put a light highlight on the sort of lightest edge of the face and also in the shaded areas, like on the wrong side basically, to sort of give a little bit of illusion of backlighting. And it just makes everything pop a little bit. It gives a little bit of extra depth, and I really like the effect that it gives. And of course also highlighting the hair in the same way that I did the darker shades. I just used a tiny brush to make little white strands, because she has really well conditioned hair and it's always really nice and shiny and perfect and pretty, and considering how much she runs around and gets shot at and dodges aliens, I don't know how her hair is always this perfect, but you know, maybe it's some sort of FBI secret, who knows. Doing the same thing here, I'm putting a really thin white edge around the hair, which again gives that depth and also offers a bit of contrast against that really dark background, and also the black outline that I did. And now we come to the part that gave me the most grief of everything. So firstly, I had to resketch my lettering because I was a dum-dum and painted everything dark and you couldn't see, I couldn't see the inks. And then my Posca pen was giving me grief. It kept clogging, and I didn't, you know, I cut it out here, but I kept having to go back and dry off the nib and start over, and it was just a pain in the butt. And then the Posca isn't very opaque, so I decided to go in with the Comic White and paint over it with a brush and give it some more thickness in certain places to make it look more like actual brush lettering. But then I had the problem of I could not get the angle of the paper right. Like, it was awkward whatever I did, and there's a camera tripod in the way and my desk is very small. I made a lot of grunty, irritated, sighing noises while I did this. Luckily, you can't see that in the video, and you can't see it in the final results because it turned out pretty good. I like how very stark the white is, but also very swirly and pretty, and sort of matches Scully's hair actually. And of course the little planet dot over the eye. So now this bit's done, and I brought out my dotting tools that I actually use for nail art and started on the galaxies, which is really going to make this piece come together. So I started with doing some larger dots, maybe planets, maybe suns, who knows, and then I went in with the smaller dots to make smaller planets, I guess. And then I abandoned those completely and took out my Posca pen instead, because I found that this was taking too long, basically, and they were all the same brightness. And I mean, if you look at sort of galaxy illustrations and photographs, not all the stars are the same size and brightness. So bringing in the not completely opaque pen that sort of lets the pink and the purple shine through, I could get that effect. And also was a lot quicker because I can just like dot the heck out of this. Whereas using the dotting tools, I had to dip and dip again, and I had to work a bit slower. So I really wanted a lot of stars. So I'm just dotting them in, finding little patterns, making little clusters as I go. And then after a while I started making sort of trails of stars and planets, little solar systems, I guess, and I kind of wanted them to radiate from Scully, if that makes sense. Like she's the center of the universe, which is in no way her view of the world, I don't think, but just to sort of draw focus to her, because she is the focus of the image, basically. So yeah, the effect turned out really cool, and it's really spacey. And it's pretty much exactly what I envisioned for this piece, so many hours of work, definitely well worth it, definitely a learning process. I really like painting portraits. It was fun. So yeah, she's pretty much done, and I'll show you a still picture of her scanned, which is a bit better than the photographs I have. So here she is, Our Lady of Science. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I hope I could inspire you, and I'll see you next time. Bye!